Samaritans. Thank you for your time and attention. So now, we all have the privilege of hearing from an exceptional woman. Nancy Rappaport first connected with Samaritans when she published her award-winning book, In Her Wake, sharing her journey as she explored her mother's suicide, which happened when she was 4 years old. Her inspiring book is referred to as a fearless, stunning narrative that reaffirms the strength and resiliency of the human spirit. When Nancy met Roberta Hertig, my predecessor, a bond developed and flourished. She has since run in the Samaritans 5K and in the Boston Marathon, not once, but 3 times. And 1 year had her daughter run with her. She's also a member of the Samaritans Council. Nancy is a graduate of Princeton University and Tufts Medical School and an associate professor at Harvard. Her diverse accomplishments include being nominated for an Oscar for Best Documentary for The Children's Storefront and receiving the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Sidney Berman Award for School-Based Study in Treatment of Learning Disorders. Whew. You're going to have to look in the program for the rest of her phenomenal accomplishments. She currently works as an attending adolescent and child psychologist with Cambridge Public Schools, and we are truly honored that she is with us today. Nancy?
If someone dies by suicide, it is as if they took their skeleton and put it in your closet. This can be a harsh reality. Families can be left with ambivalent feelings, grief-stricken, confused, and ashamed. Samaritans, each one of you bears witness. We come together as a community, a community that holds each other and helps bear the unimaginable. Do you need me to put this on? Okay. Hi. Okay. That was my dad that helped me know that you all couldn't hear what I was saying. You have to love your parents. The reason I stand before you is because I've devoted my life as a child psychiatrist, having conversations with teenagers and families when families are terrified because a child may have been suicidal and they're trying to find how to have that difficult conversation and move forward. You know, I also see there's 2 ways that Samaritans provide support. One is in the suicide prevention, and the other is providing comfort for those who have gone, when someone is gone. To those of you newly bereaved, may you find healing from the support of the Samaritan community. And thank you for those who make it happen. I'm going to speak to you today as a clinician, and also on a personal level, as someone who has found tremendous comfort from the community that Samaritans offers. The first time that I contacted Samaritans was after I had published my memoir, and I met with the executive director, and she invited me to go to the Samaritans 5K. You know, I had been relatively private about my loss of my mother in my professional community, and they often joked with me, my colleagues, that it was as if I'd come out of the closet. And when I got to the Samaritans 5K, it was stunning. I drove into the parking lot, and there were 3,000 people. People with in teams with T-shirts of their loved ones. And there was a sense of celebration and joy in the midst of loss. It was as if people had gained a cause for life, even though they had lost someone that they loved. So I'm going to tell you a story just to help us understand the value of what Samaritans does. 2 stories. So one of the aspects of me having published my memoir is that I would do public speaking at conferences, talk show radios, and I was doing a call-in talk show, and a man called in. And he had an elderly voice, husky voice. And he said, "We all have a right to die," and he expects someday to induce his own departure. He followed this with an inflated statistic about suicide, and that he saw suicide as an acceptable way to go. So I responded, when someone's depressed, he's convinced that nothing will ever change for the better, and that no one will care if they're gone. This is the faulty logic of depression. Those of us in the room who have lost someone to suicide know that. And at that point, the announcer faded out the elderly man, and he was lost in the radio air. And I felt depleted and worried that my efforts to publicize my story, to begin a conversation that love lasts longer than death, and to make meaning from loss was somewhat exploitive. The next day, and you do this if you've been in the work of this kind of clinical work, I looked for a sign to tell me how was I going to get momentum to keep doing this? And I went for a run, and I came back, and I opened my email, and I saw a letter from this elderly man's wife. And someone had heard, a family friend had heard this man, recognized his voice, called the elderly man's wife. She went to his office, the elderly man's office. He said, "I was planning on killing myself today." She brought him to the hospital. They were making changes in the medication. She wanted to let me know, and she wanted to tell me how relieved she was. This is the kind of work that's happening in the Samaritans, that someone may be on the precipice, and there is a reaching out and a connection that can change that moment, that decision to stay alive. So I spoke to a wonderful man who is a volunteer here, who has volunteered for the Samaritan Lifeline 4 hours a week for 4 years. He lost his son to suicide many years ago. And I asked him to describe, what is it about, how do you describe Samaritans? And the thing that he said was, it is anonymous. Many times the person calling in may know the name, but that's about it. And that you listen and engage, and you try to gently encourage the person calling in to disclose what they're troubled about, and then provide good enough space that they can have some reflection. So I asked him, well, can you give me an example of someone that you had this discussion with? And he told me about a woman that had called in who had a terminal diagnosis and was naturally feeling devastated, and bleak in her outlook. And she said that she had decided that she would control the end of her life and take suicide by medication. That was her choice. And her timing wasn't clear, but she thought it was going to be imminent. And she talked about, as they were talking together, they talked about the preparation to end her life. And something about that comment of the preparation to end her life stopped her short. And she was like, "Oh, I have so many things to do. Thank you so much." And she hung up. So what we can hope in these moments of distress is to have an offering and a way of finding a way to avert disaster. The other thing that I think is important for us to remember is, even though many times what people talk about is that there's underlying mental illness and substance abuse, often with a completed suicide, the actual suicide event is usually a momentary crisis, anywhere from a few minutes to 24 hours. And that, again, is where something like the Samaritans' Lifeline can make a huge difference. The other thing that I just want to say is I'm so happy that Samaritans is using texting with teenagers. It's so creative, and I've worked with teenagers for 23 years in a school-based health center. And you have to be creative. You have to do whatever it takes. And any of us who have teenagers knows that talking on the telephone is so passé. And you have to if you're going to go in and try to connect with teenagers when they're in distress, texting is the way to go. So kudos for that part. I think that's really helpful. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here to wipe away the tears and for taking care of those who need us. You are honoring those we love and easing the pain. Thank you for being here to help us turn sadness into fragile joy, grief to enduring love, and generously supporting Samaritans' life-saving work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.